thank you all for, I'm really knocked out by the number of people here. Amazing. Thank you all very much. I won't keep you very long with this, because we now just want to sell more books. So. As it says in the beginning of the book, I was in Israel in '68 on my honeymoon with my first wife. And we went to a little town called Sfat, or Safad, which is above the Sea of Galilee. And we were in a very old synagogue. And getting comments. It's all right, it's all right. The rabbi asked me, he said, where do you come from? And I said, I just moved here, that was '68. I said, Norwich. The man went white and literally spat over his shoulder 3 times. And then he told me the story of William of Norwich. And I'll tell you that story in a moment, but for those of you who don't know. And it turns out that this was, what happened in Norwich in 1144 was the first incidence in Europe of what was to be called later the Blood Libel, which is the idea that Jews killed Christian children, mainly boys, I think, and used the blood for ritual purposes. And the story of William was he was a young lad, 12, 13-year-old boy, who was found in Thorpe Wood, which I suppose which is now probably Mousehold Heath. And he was, it seemed to have been ritually sacrificed. He had holes in his hands, and he had a crown of thorns on his head. And strangely enough, he had no trousers, which is important for other reasons when people try to figure out why he was killed. And his murder became blamed on the Jews in the city, which there were a small number. We don't know how many, probably about 100, maybe a bit more at the time. And it wasn't, and there was some uprising at that point, or unrest. Nobody was, there weren't any pogroms at that time about this. And a monk came from Monmouth called Thomas, who wrote a book which has recently been republished in a new translation called The Life and Passion of William of Norwich, which, if you like this book, I would highly recommend that book as well. It's published by Mary Rubin, by Penguin. And it's a retranslation of that manuscript, which was basically a hagiography of William, making him into a saint, a book about saints. And he became venerated in Norwich. He was a local saint. He was never canonized officially. But at that time, there were lots of local saints. And so Thomas turned him into, through this book, turned him into a martyr for the cause of Christianity. And subsequently, years later, quite a few years later, I suppose, there were other incidents in other cities, in Lincoln, in York, in Bury St. Edmunds, where similar accusations were made. But this was, what happened in Norwich, was the first in Europe. And I was surprised because, what's his name, Simon Schama did a big series on the Jews in England. And not in England, but just on the Jews. And he said that the first Blood Libel took place in York or Lincoln, which was 100 years later. But I'm not going to get an argument with him. Why not? Well, because it's not worth it. Anyway, so that's in very, very brief outline the story of William of Norwich and why it's important. For me, as a Jew, coming to this city, it wasn't, I felt a bit trepidatious, I suppose, like coming to a city where this is what happened to Jews, even though it was quite a long time ago. But it sort of haunted me for all these years, off and on, but I had other things to do, and I was working at UEA teaching, and then I retired, started writing novels. And then I started working on it, off and on, doing a lot of research. Although, in fact, the manuscript that Thomas wrote is the only primary source. Everything else is sort of commentary on it. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I started seriously thinking about writing it, but I could not think of how to write it. It was a very difficult thing, and there were certain things I didn't want to do, but I couldn't find a way in. And if anybody has written, you know that you sit down at your typewriter, or not typewriter anymore, sorry, wrong century, your computer, and you try to get something to come out, and usually nothing happens for a while. So one day I was trying to make a go of it again, having now been full of this stuff and have, really sort of immersed myself in this story and the background of the period and everything else. And I started to write. Now this is going to sound completely bizarre. I heard a voice as I wrote. I wrote it down on the paper. Let's see if I can read this to you, because this is the first thing I heard. If I can find the page. Sorry, I have to take off my glasses. Celine, can you just take my glasses off? Unlike most older people, no, off.
Oh, off.
Yes. Sorry, most people use them for reading. I have to take them off to read. Right.
Do you need me to find the page?
No, I've got the page. Joseph the fool is about to die, my death foretold by the baying of the mob in the street below. Fool I might seem to be, but I still comfort myself with the conceit that I, lifelong crippled, with crooked back, feeble legs, and wooden tongue, and so for all the world's a fool, have managed to outlive all the learned, clever men I ever knew. All those men with their straight backs and their straight legs, all those men with their silken throats and clever words, so straight-backed, so straight-legged, so smooth of tongue, so clever, and now so dead. May they rest in peace. William, too, I outlived him, but that circumstance brings me no comfort. Although he is my abiding solace, he is also my abiding sorrow. My lovely William, my dearest friend, my saintly companion, dead these many years. I take some comfort from the fact that he has long since found peace with God's angels. Moreover, William is remembered. He is venerated. Not so Joseph, an unseemly hulk, a freak of body, a freak of old age, beyond understanding. I am thankful that no one is left alive who remembers when I returned, an apparent stranger, to the city of Norwich. I am thankful that no one remembers when I wasn't among them as a very old man. For the world now around me, I have no childhood, no past. All my transgressions concealed, all my years as a respected scribe in a distant land, unknown and unsung. Now little more than a drooling relic, an ancient fool who has always been there, slumped in the corner of the room. I am thankful for all that lost history. And on it goes. But that voice that I was able to write, thank you.
Do you want the back?
Yes, please. It's wonderful to have such attentive daughter-in-laws. That voice opened it for me. I was looking at this door for years. How do I get into this? And that was my key. That voice was the key that turned the lock that made it possible to start writing this book. And I tried to think of what I heard Gabriel Garcia Marquez said, that when he wrote a novel about Simón de Bolívar, he had read all this stuff about Bolivar, a couple of years, and then he put it all to one side and started to write and never returned to look at the material. I can't say I did that because I did return to the book because for various reasons. But that idea that you soak all this stuff up and you try to put it into your imagination, and you have to get away from the historical stuff to do that. And you try to stay there and you try to stay away. So what I tried to write, and all other things to say, that I think this is going to sound very strange. This is basically a love story. I mean, it's a story about a horrible event that happened, but it's a story about love, the love of these two boys. And I was trying, in a sense, to rescue William from being just a cipher, because nobody ever knows anything about him except how old he was and what he did. And he's portrayed as this martyr. And I wanted to give him a humanity. So that was one of the things in the book that I was trying to do. Another thing that some people might find, and I've been told is a bit offensive, is my portrayal of the Jewish community in Norwich. As I said, this was a very small community. They'd come over with the Normans in 1066. They came to Norwich about 1130, 1135. And people portray or think of Jews in this period as these kind of meek people who were, subservient to everything else. In fact, they were, they hated their Christian masters bitterly, that they could never say it for obvious reasons. And they were hated by the Normans who brought them over. They were not wonderfully liked by the Saxon population as well, for obvious reasons, because they were moneylenders. And as we know at the moment, nobody likes a banker. And this is what these people were, basically. They were bankers to the king. They were bankers, lend money to build cathedrals and churches, etc., etc. So they were very well hated. And they hated back just as well. So I've tried to portray them in a different light than is normally portrayed. And also you have to remember that it wasn't many years before that there had been great slaughters of Jews during the first Crusades. And this was still very much in the Jewish consciousness of these people. And there was a whole series of poems bitterly attacking Christians for what they'd done. So I've tried to portray the Jewish community as I think they may have been, right? So, but I don't know. But essentially, I hope you'll get from the book a kind of humanity for a period of time and relationships, which for me are the most important thing in trying to explain what happened, or for me, the important things of what happened. I think I've probably said enough. I'd be happy to answer any questions, if they're not too difficult.